So we're going to be talking about the future of work. I know that a lot of us have been part of conversations about the future of work, really talking about the skills that are needed for young people to, or adults to thrive in the future. And we've all talked about different frameworks. And we're going to touch on that today as well. But the point of the conversation is really to focus on something that's one of the most challenging aspects of this whole topic. And let me explain what I mean by that. The way we look at this at Public Allies, where I work, is that we're at an inflection point in this country, right? Where arguably the next 10 years will disproportionately shape the next 100 years. If you take a look at and consider trends like the future of work and the future of citizenship, and we think about our society's means of preparing young people for that future, and then you add to that these massive demographic shifts that we're experiencing, and then you consider sort of a time frame, right? If some people would look at this, and you can make a strong argument that this is really akin to the Industrial Revolution in terms of the time frame. And when that's the case, and the situation is the next decade will shape the next century, we all know how hard it is to bring about change in education. So what do we do? This is really a perfect storm that's approaching, and it really requires some radical thinking about how we do this. I speak about this from, as I mentioned, as was said, I've worked across sectors, but also in the education sector, and have worked at it. It's challenging, right? We all know how slow change can be. So that's kind of the point of this conversation, to really be thinking about the future of work, but really be thinking about it from an action perspective and saying, if we have this time frame, how do we approach it? How do we bring about some radical change? So those are some of the assumptions that are kind of underlying the conversation today, and it's really kind of a workshop approach, and we're going to be expecting you to engage as well. You all are going to be getting up at a certain point to do some writing and give us your thoughts. You're going to have a chance to engage with the presenters and ask them questions. And to that point, we've got 3 fantastic speakers today to join us to help us wrestle with these questions that represent different perspectives, from the corporate perspective, kind of what we're working backward from when we're considering the future of work, the higher ed perspective, and then the K-12 perspective. So we have, starting with Audrey Lee, who heads up, let me just ask you to come on up to the panel. We have Audrey Williams-Lee, who's a VP of Corporate Philanthropy and Human Resources at Hyatt Hotels. We have Marilee Mayo, Dr. Marilee Mayo, who's an innovator in the SEL space at the higher ed level. And she's a big consultant on the future of work. And then we have Maria Karstarfin, the superintendent of the Atlanta Public School District. Let's give them a round of applause. So we're going to start off and have each of the panelists give a 2-minute statement, and then we'll get into some questions. Please, Audrey.
Hi. Oh, thanks, Jaime, and good morning, everyone. As Jaime said, I work for Hyatt Hotels Corporation, and I have our corporate human resources, philanthropy, CSR, and talent acquisition. And I just want to share a few comments around how we're looking at the workforce, both today and the future, and set some context around, from a corporate perspective, how our company is looking at the future of work. So this quote I like because it really describes a question that we're all trying to answer. So from a corporation, from a policymaker, educator standpoint, is how do we make sure that we can develop employees with the skills we need, both our current workforce as well as the workforce that we'll need going forward. And when we think about the future of work at Hyatt, there was some work done by Accenture, a consulting firm, back in 2017, and they came up with these kind of 4 defining features when you think about the future of work. And when I look at the SEL model in terms of the competencies and skills, we see a lot of this really is covered. But I would say looking at technology, particularly digital and digital skills from a perspective of not just using that technology, but how you interact and connect with others around that technology and those impacts, that's something that we need to help prepare our young people as well as our current workforce for. Next, I borrowed the SEL model because I like it. So I took the competencies that were shared earlier, but also some work done by the Institute for the Future to look at future competencies. And as you see, for 3 of those around emotional intelligence, growth mindset, adaptability, a lot of that is very much similar, overlaps with what the SEL model has. What I would say around truth-seeking and first principles thinking, these are a combination, I think, of emotional skills as well as other cognitive skills, but particularly on truth thinking, as we move forward, how do we help all of our workers understand how to get beneath what's right in front of them? So not taking things at face value, but really digging and getting underneath. And then for first principles, how do we really test assumptions? A lot of you may have heard about Agile within the digital realm. How do you work differently? How do you iterate? A big part of Agile as it relates to that model for technology and working is really around testing your assumptions and knowing what those assumptions are. So these would also be additional skills that I would add as we're thinking about developing our youth. And then finally, just a little bit around Hyatt, we have a leadership profile and we expect leadership at all levels. And from a leadership perspective, these are the attributes that we've defined as being predictive of success at our company. And with these attributes, there are a lot of SEL competencies inherent in them, but just to share from a corporation perspective how we're looking at this. Thank you.
It's okay. So we are the bookends of this conversation where kids end up in the workforce. And of course, ideally, we want them to go to college, but I'm on the front end in pre-K through 12 education. Again, good morning. My name is Maria Karstarfin. I'm the superintendent of Atlanta Public Schools, and I was the former superintendent of Austin Independent School District in Texas. And part of the reason I'm here is in part because we want to have a conversation about building the case that articulates for people how crucial it is that social emotional learning skills are part of all schooling, and that the classroom experiences, the apprenticeships, what kids are experiencing even before they come into school in 0 to 3 is all a game changer for how their lives can be more successful if we're able to bring all of this into their experience while they're getting prepared for the workforce. And so as a champion of social and emotional learning, I've been in this work for 10 years, starting with the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning with Castle in Texas, where we were one of the original research districts. And when I went to Atlanta, which was coming off the heels of the largest cheating scandal in the history of public education, we were challenged to look at what was the culture that brought this great metropolitan gateway city to its knees in its behavior of the adults inside and outside of the school system. And so a lot of that is tied to the concept of what we're seeing in the urban environments. I am a urban superintendent. I trained through Harvard University to do just that. I did not want to work in any other systems other than ones with large numbers of African American, Hispanic, brown, black, poor children who have been disenfranchised from the school process. And a lot of what I see in both my experience and the research is now saying that the focus on high-stakes testing for the last few decades, getting away from whole child development, getting away from skills that are teachable for kids who have not been able to navigate the structure of high-stakes accountability to have success in schools, can be changed if we actually teach social emotional learning skills. And what we're seeing in our schools and outside of schools, thank you, please clap for them because they desperately need this support. Is that the sobering truth for them is up here in the left corner, that at least in Atlanta, we are what people in research have dubbed the most unequal metropolitan city in America. The income disparity is just shocking. For white students, it sits a median income of $167,000. For black students, it's closer to $23,000. And what we're seeing in these hard lines around socioeconomics is that kids who live in poverty can't get out of intergenerational poverty, in part because, as most of us believe, as the great equalizer, public education should give kids access to skills, whether that's academic, career, or decision-making, which is where a lot of social emotional skills are baked. At the heart of it, though, is that they're not getting the education and their families don't have enough economic lift. But on top of that, they don't have any of the skills to navigate beyond what the workforce is going to be expecting from them because we're not doing it in schools. So we have tried very hard in Atlanta, and I'll talk more about it in our discussion and Q&A, to change from the sobering truth to something that is better for kids. And I'll talk more about culture in a moment, but the evidence is proving to work by focusing more on social emotional learning, by focusing more on culture, working with adults and children. Our graduation rate has grown 18.8 percentage points. Our college going rate has increased 11 percentage points, and we've seen the highest achievement to date in state standardized assessments. That's what people expect out of, the high stakes accountability piece. The other data that I'll talk about is all around engagement. Adults wanting to be in school more, wanting to be higher on delivering for kids, and creating an environment that's good for young people and older people. I'll talk more about the district, but we stand at about 51,500 kids. It is overwhelmingly African American, overwhelmingly poor, but I will tell you, like I said, 10 out of 10 students absolutely have hopes and dreams, and I think by focusing on social emotional learning, we can actually achieve that in addition to lifting the high stakes accountability data that people expect to see.
Well, I'm covering the higher ed part of this discussion, which is considerably less inspiring and more cut and dry, so, oh yeah.
We love college.
But we'll start from workforce because the main thing about higher education today is that the four-year degree is essentially the gatekeeper to most well-paying jobs. And I've been instructed to point out that this guy is not jumping down the cliff, he's trying to get up to the cliff, because for many individuals, this is a very difficult leap. There are two fundamental requirements for you to get a four-year degree. The first is that you have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars just lying around in a bank account somewhere. And the second is that you have no need for 4 years to go to work during daylight hours and, pay rent and put food on the table. And those two criteria are almost impossible for most real people to actually meet. And you've seen what's happened with the student debt crisis when people try to accomplish the first ones of these goals. And the second one, perhaps less well recognized, the need to work while going to school, has also been extremely traumatic. There's a recent study that's been put out by the Gates Foundation and Public Agenda showing that 54 to 71% of all students dropping out of higher ed are doing so just to keep their jobs. Okay, so this system, as it is currently constructed, doesn't work for most people. And not surprisingly, 2/3 of the people in the United States don't have a four-year degree, and they really have no realistic way to get from here to there. Tactically, there's just no way for them to do it. And so what has happened in higher education is that the system is starting to break down and reorganize in a different way. And we're seeing this in pockets. We're seeing this particularly in computer science and IT, the lower rungs of the public health professions, also in manufacturing, where instead of people needing to get a four-year degree to get that first well-paying job, they can go out and do a little bit of learning, get a few more skills, get those skills credentialed somehow, often by a third-party provider, not necessarily by a school, because they didn't even necessarily learn those skills in school. Maybe they learned them online or in the military or helping out with Uncle Joe in the garage, but they can get them certified somewhere and then get that, if employers recognize those certifications, which is happening in some industries, they can get that first rung on the employment ladder, stabilize a while economically, then save up enough money to get that next little jump of education, slowly make their way up. And this is a much friendlier system. It's smaller, more digestible chunks. And so this is starting to take hold. If you doubt that this is a disruptive innovation in progress, I'll point you to some data. The colleges that have started to embrace this kind of model where you don't do it all at once, okay, they are seeing tremendous growth rates, 500% in enrollment over the last 10 years compared to most colleges that have pretty stagnant enrollment. Similarly, there are other solutions such as massively online open courses. They are seeing rates of growth around 900% over the last 10 years because they offer the micro degrees, the nano credentials, or the nano degrees and micro credentials, and also just one-off classes where you can learn to do something, have a demonstration project to show your boss and say, yeah, now I know how to do this, give me that promotion. So these are starting to take off, and even on the employer side, we're starting to see employers think beyond the four-year degree. A recent study out of Northeastern shows that 62% of employers say they're either considering passively or actively pursuing hiring based on things other than that four-year degree. And what this does for SEL skills is it makes it a chance to become relevant in ways that it wasn't before. In the four-year degree paradigm, there was really almost no role for SEL skills because the signal that employers were basing their hiring decision on was the degree, and there was no degree in emotional self-management, for example. There really wasn't even a college course in emotional self-management. There was no signal to the employer about who had these skills and who didn't, so they couldn't preferentially hire the people who had the skills versus those who didn't, and so there was no reward feedback into the system. Okay, and then employers complain, well, we don't have people who have these skills. Well, obviously, the tools for selecting seeing who has and who doesn't, many employers don't have or don't use, and frankly, they're not that well developed. But in the new system, where everything is sort of going to be micro-credentialed, there are many insertion points where you can teach and certify SEL skills. You can make whole credentials around SEL skills. You could go to some place like the early childhood development folks who have their own certifications, say, hey, this is really relevant to SEL skills. Let us infuse your certification with some evidence base for these people having SEL skills. So it's really opening up the space in a way that will allow much more creativity, much more engagement of SEL.
Great, thank you, Marilee. So there you have it. There's some initial sort of perspectives from three different points in the pipeline. I'd love to hear. So it's promising to hear what you're talking about, Marilee. From the corporate perspective, Audrey, what's your take on what Marilee is talking about in terms of the trend that we're seeing, or the need to better assess or think of other ways of assessing skill set and matching it with employer needs?
Yeah. And I have to say, where Marilee is exactly what we're looking at as an organization. So we're looking at ways to assess skills, particularly for the entry-level jobs in our hotels. We have a program where we are looking to do more opting in. So we're looking for young adults who are not in school or not working or come from underserved communities, looking for roles and putting them in those jobs, and we're using assessments to help do that. And we're using assessments that are very specifically related to predicting success on the jobs, but then also once they're in, we have a very good training curriculum, and so different kinds of ways that they can train on the job, as well as go back for additional educational credentials, which we can support as a company. So it really is something that we recognize to grow as an industry. We're going to have to go beyond what our traditional sources have been, and so that's something that we're definitely working on.
Great, thank you.
Actually, I'd like to ask
yeah,
Audrey,
please.
how long did it take you to find these assessments?
Probably, I would say we kind of got lucky with it. We were able to connect with one, but it probably took, I've been with High about 2.5 years. So probably about 1.5 years of going out and just looking to see what would actually fit our needs.
It is a search, I'll point out. It is not a natural, easy thing for employers to find these tools.
Which is interesting, an interesting point. And as I'm having conversations with different corporations and HR functions and some major technology companies talking about how they are literally reinventing their whole HR function. And I'd love to hear how that's evolving. I mean, I get a sense of what you're looking for, but talk a little bit about the pace of change within the organization, within the corporation, and how quickly do you think you guys are responding to it?
Yeah, and I would say that it's fast. So we look at what's happening in the industry and what's happening globally. There is definitely, as a company, as all companies, we want to keep up. If I look at what we're doing within the organization, we have a huge focus on inclusion and diversity. It's always been a part of where Hyatt is, but making sure that we have a culture that is accepting and has a sense of belonging, where people come and they feel welcome and they want to stay, is something that we put a lot of focus and energy into. We're also spending a lot of time, as I just referenced earlier, about from a talent acquisition and sourcing standpoint, about where do we get talent from? And how do we open that up and go beyond the going to someone's alma mater or going to places where we're typically accustomed to hiring, because people tend to want to hire people who are like them. And it does take work to actually break that for a hiring manager to really be open and to look more broadly. And then as we think about, some of our students who are unfortunately not getting an education in school, and they're coming out of school honestly not prepared to work, there's a lot of work and energy that goes into helping those young adults know how to work and how to persist in employment and to get themselves on the right track. And so we do a lot of training of supervisors and other supports to make that possible. We've been told that with some of the focus we're doing with Opportunity Youth, we've picked the most difficult population to work with. We have seen some of that, but it's also from a community engagement, and we think a corporate responsibility standpoint, we have to engage in our communities, and we have to bring people into the workforce and make sure everyone has a chance to really participate in the economy. And so that's a big focus for us.
And I'm going to get to the superintendent in just a minute. I want to just acknowledge that a lot of what we're talking about in the context of SEL, and I think a lot of some of the discussions that have been had at the conference, a lot of this is focused on young people, the students themselves. But there's also this need to focus on adults. I know that's been addressed in a couple different sessions. But it's not just adults teaching the young people, it's actually within corporations, right? SEL is needed when we're starting to think about creating more inclusive environments. There's a whole higher order of SEL skills that's needed within corporations themselves. And Audrey, I think you're touching on that a little bit, but I'd love to just, what does that training look like when you're thinking about it from an SEL context internally?
Sure. So one of the things about our culture, so Hyatt, our purpose is to care for people so they can be their best. And that care extends to our communities, to our colleagues, as we call our employees, to our guests. But what that has led to is that we assess for empathy. So empathy is really critical in our business to make connections with our guests and customers, and also to engage our employees. And when we look at leaders and we look at individuals coming in, we have a custom assessment, again, that predicts success at Hyatt, and that's one of the areas that we look at. A lot of focus on self-awareness and emotional intelligence, self-regulation, relationships. Those are all pretty critical. And when we assess for performance at our organization, it's a combination of not just the results you get, but how you go about getting them. And so I shared earlier what our kind of success attributes are, and if we don't have leaders and others who are able to display that, they won't be in leadership positions for long. And so it's something that we're very serious about, but we find that it is absolutely critical to our business and what we're in, that we have leaders and we have employees who actually have these SEL competencies.
That's great, thank you. And there's more follow-up on that, and I want to, because I know that Marilee's working you're working on some of the actual tools that could be used by corporations to help better assess this. But before we go there, I'd love to turn to Superintendent Karstafen, and you're really at the front lines of all of this. And a lot of this conversation, we have the corporate perspective, which is kind of what we're working backward from, and then we've got higher ed and some of the innovations and trying to think outside the box. As far as working outside the system, if you will, or reinventing the system, as Marilee's talking about. But you're really working at the front lines of some of the most challenging, facing some of the most challenging circumstances, right? You are the future pipeline. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that in terms of some of the, what are the biggest challenges you face to sort of integrating future of work skills, SEL skills. The majority of future of work skills arguably are SEL skills, but there are other aspects to it as well. Talk a little bit about that, and to what extent is there innovation happening within K-12?
Yeah, so I don't think that most people look to the American public school systems as the place for the hotbed of innovation. So, and it comes at a consequence. When you, in our space, given the nature of high stakes accountability, you don't have a lot of margin for failure at all. Testing, exploring, challenging the status quo is a deadly business. And so what I have seen, I'm a 3-time superintendent, it's not my first rodeo, and I feel like over that time span, I have seen the best and worst of what America is offering for its own future. When kids get a quality education, it actually stabilizes our democracy. It means that people have academic skills to actually succeed in school, go on to college, those career skills so they can be competitive in a rapidly evolving flat economy. But those decision-making skills, the social-emotional skills, so that you're smart but have the heart to be a better person than the people who are raising you today, is really at what I think is at the center of this work. And what I've seen in largely minority, high poverty, intergenerational poverty systems like the capital city systems of America is that that our kids are trapped, that the actual system, the system change that's needed has not happened. And while we're chipping around on the edges, fundamentally, we haven't changed the way we are doing our work. So we know that the evidence says that while we've been making movement and progress, trying to come back around on academics in America, that there's this emerging need in the workforce around social emotional skills so that kids can actually participate in those opportunities for college and for a career. But what we're seeing, especially in high poverty communities, is that even when the child is born, that they are not getting the kind of, as people describe it, learning brain that they need nurtured and supported from the outset. And so by the time they make it to us in kindergarten, for example, there are lots of social skills that they are missing. It is hard to get that from the home or the community when everything you see has been part of that experience that has kept your entire family and your family's family disenfranchised. So some of the changes that, doesn't sound very innovative, but it is real because we still haven't made it, is the work around early childhood education. Quality early childhood education, birth to 3 is critical. Most superintendents will tell you, you don't get state or federal money for that work. You are trying to figure it out in other ways. I think that is one small, but I think important step for us to kind of get kids' brains supported in a way that helps them be more receptive. Our kids are in environments where they're in high stress. Their stress levels are high. It's fight, flight, flee mode all the time. And some of the things that we're seeing that we've changed, so I've invested in early childhood education. Another one that we've changed is all around policing. Every urban district is going to have police officers and others in schools, and what we've done is ensure that first our officers are trained in restorative practices, in social emotional learning, that they are first mentor and supporter before they are police officer. And so those are just kind of 2 examples. But I feel like that's a little bit of how we've been able to chip around existing structures that we know could be better for kids, but that that if you get too innovative or too far out there, it makes it more difficult. But the third thing that we did that I think is essential was that we stopped trying to fix the kids. We just stop it. They're okay. We're messing them up. They're okay. They're coming to us with who they are, what they are. Let them be. And we need, as adults, to make the shift ourselves. So our goal is to train the adult bus drivers, police officers, custodians, principals, teachers, all those people get the social emotional learning supports first, and then we talk about how we can support the child. And that gets integrated into school. And so that is, I mean, I think that's another one where, we've tried to make that change. And as a result, I told you I'd talk a little bit more about the data, but it's around engagement of adults. We were in the toilet when we started. I mean, we were like, no one was happy in our district. No one wanted to work. They were actively disengaged. That's what the research kind of described them as when we saw our first round of results. And now we're trending above the national average. We are closer at like 57% of the team. The adults feel like that they are more engaged in being able to kind of control their own destiny within the district, their own behavior, their own engagement, which is now allowed for, I think, the opening of the floodgates with the children. And so it's not like, off the charts innovative, but when you're working within bureaucratic systems that have been long kind of crusted in the way that we do this work in education, these are examples of things that have dramatically changed the culture in our system.
Yeah, thank you for
Jaime,
that.
can I build?
Please, Audrey. Yeah.
And I just wanted to build on something that Maria said relative to SEL for adults. From a corporate perspective, we expect our leaders to be the role models and to set the example for helping to develop and helping to build relationships with and to coach their teams. And when I look at even my school district, I live right outside Chicago, we're doing a lot of work around equity. There's a lot that progress we've made, but a big piece of it has also been bringing everyone along, so the whole ecosystem of anyone who's interacting with children, that they're all trained in those same kinds of skills. So I just wanted to reinforce that from a business plus what I see personally, that's really critical.
Right, Marilee, did you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, it was probably earlier when Audrey was talking, but it struck me that the first line of training of young adults often does actually occur in the service and retail industries, because so many people get jobs in retail and service. That's the first job for many people. So I was just going to ask the audience, how many of you had your first job in service, hospitality, or retail? Yeah. That is a huge, huge intervention point for SEL skills
It's a really
that they don't
interesting
get
point,
in
yeah.
school. And so, your colleagues in the rest of the industry, I mean, you have a tremendous insertion point.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, so part of the storyline for American public education, and like again in these districts where students have not been able to benefit from our core purpose around academics, so they don't come to school ready. We can't get them reading by 3rd grade. They're in the 8th grade and they're still reading on a 4th grade level, and so on and so forth. The piece that I think is sobering, and the part around the mental model change, which I hope we'll talk a little bit about before we wrap up, is that if you're not getting the academics, or let's say you've already been set up in life to be in the bottom quartile and are trapped in intergenerational poverty, but you're not getting and you didn't get a chance to develop the learning brain in the way that you needed it to be so that you could keep learning for life, and then you can't get your academics down, and then worse, like you don't get the social emotional learning skills in school. I don't know how we ensure that all Americans get to participate in our democracy. Like, how do you get to benefit from all the wonderful things that can happen? And we were talking last night, and I was talking about, Atlanta and APS and the black and white divide and the north-south divide and, how, just all this stuff. And he was like, oh, I have a friend, and they say that how did you describe it? That
it's the new America.
It's the new America, and it's wonderful. And I was like, wow, I wonder if they went below, like on the south side of the city, and just sort of like this, if you're not experiencing and seeing what's happening, and you don't know that it is really like the way the other half is living and experiencing the American dream, I don't think that those people even would know that they need to do something in the workforce, in college, even in school. And I have a mentee who says, like, there isn't a single, he's got like 5 brothers and sisters and mom and all of what family is. And he said that he's never gone to school he's in college now, until he got to college, he'd never gone to school with a white person, right? So it is, to be able to work and function in the global economy, it is very important that our kids get the exposure and are able to learn those skills to be able to interact. And he has struggled so much in college, in large part because he's like, I don't even know how to engage. It's intimidating for me. And so the work, I think, of what we do has to be about, if these are the kinds of environments our kids are living in and going to school in, and their communities are all segregated as well, they have to get the tools so that when they are in those spaces, whether it is college or in a job, they are prepared to be able to be successful. And I think if we don't teach that in school at the outset, early on,
Right.
then they don't have a fighting chance.
Yeah. You brought up the mental model piece, and there's a slide I wanted to go back to if I could. So it's this notion, I mean, in a very SEL way, right? When we're talking about broad systems change, at Public Allies, we're interested in bringing about systems change for a more equitable and just future. That's our focus. So we're always thinking in this context, and I think this is really helpful because to Maria's point, when you look at any sort of challenge here, there's everybody. I'm assuming a lot of you are familiar with the iceberg. Yes. So just on a recap level here, there's what you see, iceberg, there's the metaphor because it's, above that red line would be sort of the water level. Those are the events that we see. And in this case, young people struggling. Underneath that, there are the patterns and the trends that you're seeing over time and any sort of problem that you're trying to deal with. Underneath that is a whole systemic structure that supports and perpetuates those patterns and trends. And then beneath that are these foundational mental models that really support and underlie the system that exists. And I think this is a little bit of what you're talking about, Maria, because these mental models are not just sort of from a policymaker perspective, it's also from the participant's perspective. It may be parents, the range of stakeholders that are involved have these mental models. Knowing how difficult it is in education to make this sort of shift, what would you say, you spoke to that a little bit, but if you can just reiterate, what aspects of the mental model do you think need to shift?
Yeah, so you can't change, the experience that people have. And the mental model section itself about, people are you just are where you are. Like everybody in this room got to this room from a different path. And it should not be judged. It is your experience, and it has informed how you think about your work, how you talk about it, how you engage with people, and those are the traits that drive how you engage in all of this. And when you focus on that and think about it from a positive way, which is what we try to get adults to do so they do it for children, is that you're gonna behave in certain ways that are almost predictable. And it is in embracing that and figuring out how to drive that as a strength of what you are as a person, but then honing that even more so that your colleagues in your work team know what that is. You can then work with almost, perfect precision. You will almost always hit your targets if you if you can articulate it, you know what it is, people understand where you're coming from, and you work together to embrace that as a team. And then doing that with children is equally, it can leverage an entire classroom. Where to me it falls apart is in the systemic structures. What I have seen is when people go in and try to put in a hard policy about it, or the second piece around, the norms and trust levels, it is almost as if the system itself because of the old way that we did it, it's not coming from the people. It's coming from like a circumstance. I can't remember who was saying it. I think you were talking about the hot coffee last night. You're like, one person in McDonald's spills hot coffee on them, but all the rest of us have to get now, average warm coffee, right? It's like, we take these extremes, and all of a sudden it's like, instead of having something organic grow around a mental model that could be a big culture shift, we then take it and codify it in a way that like sucks the oxygen out of it. And as I see it, I feel like every time we come up against a wall where we're about to break through a critical moment for changing public education, it gets messed up right there. Right. And that undermines the trust. That undermines the belief that people have in themselves to develop a caring culture and be able to be part of something that's different. And I think I've seen that enough to say that that is the weakest link in the iceberg.
Mental model. Thank you. So we're running short on time on this part of the discussion, but I want to, this is all leading up to the doozy of the question, right? This is the kind of the crux of everything we're talking about. I'm going to start with you, Audrey. I'd love to get, and then I'll go to each of you to get your take on this. With you, there are two levels to this, Audrey. To what extent do you think the corporate sector recognizes the degree of intractability on the pipeline level, and what do you think can be done about it? And are there, we've kind of defined the problem, and in many ways it's kind of disheartening because we're thinking, wow, this is tough, right? This is a big challenge. What do we do about it, right? And there are other trends that are out there that, I was talking about some of the trends that are sort of these headwinds, but if you think about the fact that education is an ecosystem, you think about the rise of the social enterprise, meaning that corporations now are redefining their purpose, and now more officially, right, seeing beyond just shareholder value and recognizing that they're broader stakeholders. And you consider the elimination of the middleman and peer-to-peer solutions. There's a lot of aspects of these trends and this disruption and this shift to a digital economy that can actually be leveraged, arguably. And I'm curious about, from each of you, what do you see as the most promising sort of trends out there that that people can take advantage of, and what should we sort of walk away with? You've got folks here. What's the big call to action for these different sectors?
Oh, easy question. Thank
Make
you.
it happen. Make it so.
Well, so to go to the first part about what corporations recognize, I would say there's absolutely a growing recognition that there is work to be done, and that we do need to do more to help young people get ready to enter the workforce. And so there are lots of things that different organizations are doing, working from apprenticeships in some cases to working with nonprofits that will do training and help to place young people into jobs. And so there's a lot more recognition there, but where I would say we're not at yet is figuring out what is that best way to connect perhaps even more directly with schools from a corporate standpoint to be able to kind of assist where we can to help with getting young people ready to enter the workforce. And I would say if there's something that you could do would be to really consider the element of, particularly when you're at the high school level, of helping get young people ready for work and looking at different options beyond just college. I think that there's a growing recognition that not everybody needs to go to college, but I see far too many young people getting out of high school and just have no direction in terms of where they're going. So if there's some things that I know lots of schools have some great programs. I see a lot of good things happening from partnerships with community college to do training before they graduate to different things. But think about ways that when your kids leave your doors, how can we help direct them to what might be next for them?
Thank you. Thank you. I know we're over time, but Marilee, if you could give us your 30 seconds of the brilliant solution. Make it.
For some reason, one particular solution popped in my head, but it was very specific, but I'll put it out there. Yeah. In a discussion last night, we all commented on how getting adults those SEL skills is probably the first step before you have to worry about kids. And I started thinking, well, what's a good way to get adults those skills? And it occurred to me that there is a pocket of funding out there. It's called the Perkins funding that's used in workforce boards, particularly for people who are unemployed, to retrain them. And it's always used to retrain them in fundamental English and math. There is no reason why you couldn't go to your congressman or legislature and say, hey, can we just have a bill that allows that money to be spent on SEL training instead? Because we can prove that it's effective.
So new sources of funding.
So I mean, I think that these practices and the understanding is here in this room for sort of how to do this work. But the ways to amplify it, you know, those are sort of missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with the concept of the opportunities within social enterprise. I love the idea of shifting the mindset of everybody who's involved in this and simply stop trying to go and find the right people. Like, you know, you're looking everywhere else. If you're in Atlanta, you're looking at LA trying to bring people in. If you're in LA, you're looking at China trying to bring people in. If you're in China, you're looking at America trying to bring. Can we just use the people we have and train them and support the people who live next door to us, who are in our schools, who are in our colleges, who are in our workforce? Like, just support and develop where we are. And I think that the trying to do the input, like finding the input and bringing it to us, whether that's teachers, like let's recruit teachers. No, let's train the ones we have in school right now to be the teachers that we need. Let's train the principal that you have today to be the best principal you can develop. I mean, it's a
sort of an all hands on deck.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like we're always looking somewhere else
Yeah.
to kind of do that instead of continuing to invest and support the people you have.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. Now, yes, that's a round of applause. So we want to make sure we have a chance to ask the panelists questions. We want to hear your perspective on some of this. We've got 2 microphones here. Would love to hear any questions that you might have for any of our panelists, or if there's anything that struck you in what you might have read when you went up to the tables. Now would be a good time.
Hi, I come from HR amongst other backgrounds, and so concept that I saw up there was to...
Just to ask, you're from HR in the corporate side, or?
I was in corporate, yes.
Got it. Thank you.
So an idea that I saw up there that I liked was to bring a kid to your office or your employment during school vacation week and familiarize them with your job and have everybody doing that so that the children are getting brought into the work world and exposed to something right up front at whatever level that employee is working.
I like that. Thank you. That's a great point. Very practical example. Any other questions? Yes, if you can state your name, where you're from, and then your question or comment would be great.
Yeah. My name's Houston. I live in LA. Run a company called Character Strong. And one of the things I think about a lot is prioritizing our to-be list over our to-do list. When we think about this work as being relationships being the foundation, I'd be interested to know what a habitual practice you have in each of your organizations to prioritize with actual time and or conversation, that relational piece.
Well, I'll go ahead and start, and I'll start like as an organization, we're focused very much on well-being, and a part of well-being is around gratitude. And so we actually have a National Day of Gratitude that we recognize in December, where all of our colleagues are able to send, we call it digital grams of thanks to people that they appreciate. And we also have activities that happen throughout the year. And I say for me personally, I'm also very careful to make sure that I schedule time on my calendar to just walk around, spend time with my team. My calendar gets really, really busy. And if I don't take a time just to go chat with people and see what's going on or see what's happening, it's so easy to get wrapped up into what you have to do that you lose that. So I've made that a priority.
For me, I'm a consultant in an operation of one, and my relationship with myself is really fantastic. But I also have relationships with clients, and I would say that the tool that I use the most, because clients come to me and they have something in their head that they want done, but they're really usually bad at expressing it. Like, they kind of have it, it's kind of like, when you produce it, it'll be art and I'll know it, you know, it's like, it doesn't work. So I have to get inside their heads, and I just ask questions after questions after questions. Do you mean this? Do you mean this? You know, do you expect this? Do you expect this? How about this? How about this? And I find that eventually I can get myself where I finally see the world the way the client sees it, and it's never the way I saw it. And I have to get there first before I do anything for them, and often that is like the bulk of my work.
Thank you for your question. I kind of have these yellow stickies that have been there since the first day I started the job, and one is about relationships. And I do believe, in my challenge every morning when I make it to my desk, is to look at that first, and it's all about it not being transactional. That you actually have to take the time, be focused on a real topic, make the time to do it, and be fully engaged. And I have a crazy schedule too, but that is what I do. And the other piece that I've added to that, and I think it's all about modeling, it really is. And so I make sure that everyone knows in my work, where we used to be very, and still are sometimes, very adult agenda driven, is that everything that you see about my work, how I put my public face forward, whether that's on social media or anything else, it's crystal clear that we're here working for children. And I make sure that like everyone knows that that's what the leadership is seeing and believing, and then open up pathways for them to be able to share with me. And so I just, my commitment on the B part is to, you know, like own it, like own that I work for children, and that is not a shameful thing. It is okay to put your actual mission first. And I actually believe in the space where I am, that's not necessarily true. People do this work for different reasons, they have different agendas, but I wanted to be sure that people knew that I was proud of no matter what I inherited as a district, and that I absolutely want to work for children. And that, I think, is something that everybody can be, and not just go do to check a box, but to be that and demonstrate that every day.
That is such a great question, and I will just add from my perspective, it is, you know, especially in this era of just radical transparency, it is so important to be consistent, right, with what it is that you're preaching. But at the same time, we're all imperfect, right? So it's, I think, being transparent about that as well. And I think we struggle with that at Public Allies. We talk about the kind of world we'd like to see, but we're always having to keep ourself in check to make sure that our culture is as diverse as it needs to be, and in cognitively, and, you know, representing different backgrounds. So it's really important. I think that's a great question.